honored today to be interviewing one of the Centers for Spiritual Living great ministers, wise sages.
I like that. That's great.
Okay, good. Reverend Dr. Christian Sorensen is with us today. And Christian, we would like to ask you some questions and learn about you and learn about your background and how you got started in Saints of Mind. And you were a young man when this first began, so tell us about it.
How fun. Thank you for asking me to be with you. It's such a joy. I mean, you have been such a blessing to our movement. You have captured the early days. And
on with you.
And on with me. Well, okay. I was born into this. As you know, both my parents were religious science ministers. And my dad used to listen to Ernest Holmes back in the 50s, maybe even the late 40s when he came to California. So that was the consciousness that I was born into, and so I guess I'm a cradle religious scientist. I can remember one of my first memories is sitting at Founders, and I didn't even realize it was Founders until years later. I was probably 5, and it was 4th of July, and the big choir was singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and I can remember the dark, cold sanctuary and the choir singing, and it just impacted that little mind, and it just stood like that for as long as I can remember. Our first minister was Dr. Bob Scott, and that was out at North Hollywood. And I have, some memories of being in the nursery, the crib. Later it became a bookstore, and so I just grew up running around the place.
So you were born and raised in Los Angeles area then?
I was born in Hollywood, born and raised in Hollywood. My dad was an actor, so I grew up, going to the studio with my dad. I watched him hang him high. Clint Eastwood, killed my dad. But he came home, so that one worked. I've seen him stabbed, shot, beat up. Star Trek and The Wrath of Khan. The whole movie started with his face, and then they blew him up in space. So what I learned about my dad is he's immortal. He can be hung, shot, killed, beat up, and he still comes home every night.
And your mother was a very well-known and very admired practitioner.
Yeah. The movement had an award in her honor for years, and it was called the Jackie Sorensen Practitioner Award, and its purpose was honoring the practitioners who had committed to making a living at being a practitioner with one-on-one clientele. My mom spent 30 years seeing 40 people a week.
Wow.
And so when practitioners say you can't make a living at that, it just falls on deaf ears. Yeah. She used to joke she couldn't afford to become a minister. She was well compensated by a very high clientele. People would wait in line to get an opening, and then they would book their sessions with her every week for a year out, because she was one who got results, and people discovered even after results you want to continue to work on consciousness and keep it in that high place and keep it fine-tuned. So,
did you have brothers and sisters?
I do have a brother, David, and I used to like to say that you look in a dictionary under brother and you'd see his face. It was great, but it had to be tough on him. Living with 3 ministers, that's just not fair to anybody. And the real gift that he was to our family is that he enjoyed the Hollywood scene to the fullest, and he helped us all stay grounded and not get too holy, and allowed us to just really stay in touch with a little bit more of a way of being that isn't just the ministerial.
Did you have dreams of being an actor at one time?
Well, by the age of 3, they had me on the stage of the Hollywood Palladium, and I was a ham at an early age. I still can remember looking out at the audience. I think that probably impacted me. And then by 5, I was doing the modeling. I was up on billboards all around town.
Wow.
By 10, I was doing industrial films and documentaries. And the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, it came down to either that kid or me. And I think if I had gone in that direction, it would have taken me down a different path. But I believe the acting experience really prepared me for allowing myself to be real and to feel on stage in front of people, to be a place where Spirit was able to download. And so my parents had me in acting school and classes from my earliest memory, helping hone that ability. And then when I went to college, I went to Cal State Northridge. My major was business and theater, and it seems like 2 total dichotomy of expressions, but how perfect they served for ministry, to be able to be strong in business as well as to be able to ham it up in front of people.
And sometime in there you started taking Science of Mind classes.
I did. Bless Dr. Carlo Di Giovanna, really my first mentor and inspirer. He let me, I was probably 15, and in those days it was first year, it was second year, it wasn't like 10 weeks, it was third year. And so I had done all three of those classes by the age of 19. I was going to Cal State Northridge, and it was time to return, and I wasn't quite ready to do that. And so, as I shared last night, with everybody, at age 19 in the late 70s, I took off to New Zealand, never to return. I was going to ski and surf until I couldn't anymore. Mom was devastated, and that lasted all of 2 months. But it was in New Zealand, down at the South Island, at Mount Cook Youth Hostel, that I got the call. And I said, I've been preparing myself for this, and I didn't even know that. I was raised with this kind of thinking, this kind of philosophy, with awareness. I grew up in a home where we had all sorts of wonderful people swing through there, and so I saw healing going on at a very early age. I remember 12, my grandmother, chronic back issues, and doctors said, you need operation, osteopaths, chiropractors, they just, nothing worked. One day she came over for dinner, miserable mood, and I guess that's not good for my mom, and she had had enough, and she said, hey, Christian, I want you to read this card. We used to send out these little cards from Ministry of Prayer, and so I want you to go read it. Go stick your hand on her back and read the card. And so I read the card to her about healing in her back and all that stuff. And the next day when Grandma came over, she gave me $1 and said, you healed me. And I said, that's great, Grandma. You want anything else healed? This is good. I like this. But my mom was real quick to call me over to the side and said, Christian, that $1 is not because you healed your grandmother. That $1 is for your time. It's her love for her, but you never lose sight. It is God that does the work. And in later years, I realized it was probably a love of a grandmother not wanting to disappoint her grandson. That love did the magic and moved the spine or did whatever it did to alleviate that chronic condition that she had.
I may call on you one of these days.
That healing thing is just the natural unfoldment, and so I'd be happy to do prayer with you.
So you've completed ministerial training?
That was in 1982. And so when I first came out, I helped a buddy start a place from scratch down in Orange County, and I was there for about 6 months when the Ventura County Church of Religious Science opened up. And it is truly one of the legendary buildings in our movement. It's a historical landmark. It was built after Mayan architecture. A man by the name of Stacy Judd went down to Yucatan on a Carnegie grant and came back and developed a unique style to California. And it had the inverted ceilings, the Mayan pulpit, the 7 steps. It is spectacular. And they hired me, this kid. I mean, I look back and I just don't...
How old were you at that time?
I was 22.
22 years
22
old,
when
you
I
had a church.
and it was a big place, 400 seats. I mean, there weren't many people when I started, but there were a lot when I was done, and it's really where I learned my craft. I had another great mentor come and assist me at that time that was really gave me the strength. I was mentored a great deal by Dr. Fletcher Harding.
Oh, yes.
He called it like it was, and he and Ernest in their day, they worked together and they split apart and they still admired each other. He definitely took me under his wings, and I was just blessed. I still wear his ministerial robe to this day, and when he made his transition, he asked me to do his memorial service, so I did for Fletcher, as well as for Dr. Carlo Di Giovanna. So my 2 powerful mentors asked me to give them the send-off with the richness, that legacy that they left with their work.
Did you have other teachers
well,
when you first started?
Those were the 2 that I claimed.
Yes.
And we always talked about it's good to have a practitioner and somebody you worked with, and and I really used to think I don't know if I do. But only as I grew up in years and became more comfortable with the truth is that I realized my mom and my dad were my spiritual practitioners, and they were there in my high times, my low times, my prayerful times, and my times in need. They were the ones that put me on the straight and narrow. They were the ones that had the guts to call me on the games that I may have been playing. And it was later in life that I was able to proudly stand before people and not feel childish and say, you know what? My mom and dad were my spiritual practitioners, and I talked to them consistently, and they prayed for me in the ministry consistently.
Very important, isn't it?
It is. One of the joys is they were quite involved, with ministry for a lot and in significant places, but they never stayed in one place long enough to receive the years for credentials. So when I took the Ventura County Church, I hired them as my assistants, and then they had the continuity of their 2 years to put in, and we had a triple ordination. I think the only one this movement's ever done, and on the same day, the three of us got ordained, and it was Craig Carter was the one who actually ordained the three of us. Fletcher, represented me, and Dr. Carlo, my mom, and my
So
dad.
that was the beginning of your real ministry as far as in a church.
But I did my first ministerial Sunday when I was 14.
Oh my goodness, and where was that?
That was out at North Hollywood. Dr. Carlo said, "Hey, Christian, you want to speak on Father's Day?" He gave me the full time, liked it so much, he gave me a Thanksgiving, the next year to do.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Oh, you got early
And there's still
started.
people around that say, "I was there when you gave your first talk."
Okay.
So
when you got started, when you were into the ministry and you were at the Ventura Church, did you participate in any of the community events or interfaith meetings?
I was. In Ventura, I became part of the Ministerial Association, eventually became their president there. And the Baptists would no longer come into the pagan church, even though they're the ones who built it originally. It's kind of funny. Actually, that church Ernest dedicated too. It was one of his last ones. But I was also, I can remember doing community events at the fairgrounds. I would do these mass weddings for people. It was a lot of fun. But I was also very involved with our organization at that time. I was part of the United Clergy, and I was leading that. I was serving on our International Board of Trustees in the 80s.
That early?
That early, yeah. I was in my 20s. I think I was 27 when I first participated on the International Board of Trustees. So.
And then how long were you there, and then you went to Hawaii?
I was there for 5 years, and as I shared, that's really where I learned my craft. And it's everybody not everybody, but people on the East Coast or the Midwest, they move west. They come to California. Well, where does a California surfer dude go? I had this inkling. I'm still in my 20s, and I loved it. And I had that critical point. Do I want to give up on this board of trustees? I've got this great place. I'm close to LA. But my soul was calling. I knew this wasn't going to be my final spot, and Hawaii is just a magical thing to California surfer guy. And so I went over there with a wonderful partner at that time, Stephanie, who had become a minister, and we started from scratch there. We arrived on the island, told people we were going to start speaking in a month. We put the word out. I went door to door knocking, and 4 weeks later we opened the door, and within a couple weeks we had 50 people that were regulars. We put it in, we received our charter, and then all of a sudden things started to grow there, and we got our first facility. We were having a good crowd on Sundays. We were financially supporting ourselves, and I spent a wonderful 3 years there. But it was then time for me to leave the islands and leave the work that was there in good hands. And so I was feeling called to do the work with a greater group, but I wasn't sure exactly what that looked like. And what was interesting is the week I left, the place we were in burned to the ground.
Oh my
And
goodness.
all that was left, we had a kahuna bless the place, and so it was interesting, but all that was left was a slogan we had above the door that said, "Catch the Spirit." And so I came back to the mainland, and I spent about a year just recharging, catching up on not playing from my earlier days. My brother blessed me with that opportunity to get out and experience some of that late night life of the area. But in that time I was doing speaking every week and doing classes. Dr. Bill Hornaday had me doing 4 classes a week at Founders. He was begging me to come on there, and it wasn't quite the right match. And he had asked a lot of people to come on there, so I wasn't too enamored of that. But I remember him taking me to the Jonathan Club, and he had just a 2-number membership. Like he was one of the early ones that helped form the club. He said, "Christian, this is where the city was built," and it was just he was very wonderful to me in that time frame of letting me teach, to do Sundays. It was a lot of fun, but I felt a calling coming, and so I started looking around for a cathedral. I figured I was ready to take on, if it wasn't going to be Founders, I don't know, another big place, Glendale or something. And Fletcher's place, they really wanted me, but I thought I was going to go back to Hawaii. There was a good work on Oahu, and I didn't go back to Hawaii. It wasn't a match because they were an RSI church, and Frank Richelieu called them and said, you can't hire a Christian. He will not be allowed to teach our classes. And the congregation wanted me. You know, I was from there. They knew me. It was, I won't say unanimous, but it was pretty close. But the challenge with that, because that was okay, is that Fletcher's place was, they were going to do their vote, and it was clear that they were going to take me in. But I said, I can't make a commitment until the following weekend until I hear from Hawaii. I was trying to be in integrity.
This is Encino, right?
Encino.
Okay.
Beautiful place there. Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
it was.
It was gorgeous and huge. And so I said, I can't commit until next week. And they said, we're doing it this weekend. And so they didn't go for me. I didn't know about what had happened in Hawaii, so that didn't go my way. I thought it was going my way. So I was devastated. And there was this little community down in Solana Beach. And I said, well, you know, I'll come down there. They were candidating. They said, you have to put your hat in the ring to candidate. I said, I don't really want to candidate, but, you know, I want to speak. But if that's what I got to do, I'm willing to do that. I go down there. There's 25 people in this little room on the railroad tracks. And you know, I'm sitting there in the pre-service meditation. Some guy. And I open my eyes and I'm kind of peeking. And they have a banner hanging above their glass door that says, catch the Spirit. And I said, oh my goodness, if that's not a sign from Spirit. I said, okay guys, count me in. They went ahead and brought me in, and then the place just began to roll, get bigger. This fire department kicked us out of that place. We were in the hotel, and then we took a slice of the ballroom, but there's this big Horizon church that wanted the whole place, so they kicked us out, which was, we thought, sad, but we ended up getting our own place. And then we spent 3 years in this rented place, and then the guy lost it to the bank, and we ended up in a theater, but it all parlayed to the place where we ended up buying an old packing house that was near the beach. And coming from LA, Malibu, whenever you can get acreage near the beach, it doesn't matter what it looks like. And so we grabbed this 3.5 acres, and it's a wonderful miracle story because we had no money, but it was in a bankruptcy court, and it took 25 grand just to get in there. And we didn't have it. And I said to the people, you guys want it? You got to pony up 25 grand, and they did. And so we went into the courtroom, and I had the back wall lined with our practitioners praying. And the bidding's going back and forth, and the city stands up and they want it. And that time you could get that kind of acreage for $1 million. Was crazy. They said, we got $1 million cash. We want it. We'll take it. No contingencies. And the courtroom got quiet. And someone said to me, so I don't have any money anyway, so stand up and ask the judge what would it take to beat that, because I knew that's all the city had. The other churches and the contractors, the builders had backed out because it was more than the property was worth. And he said, well, take $1,075,000. I said, okay, we'll give that. And so we won the bid. We walked down the classroom. I was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do now? We got 60 days. And so, we go to the banks, and nobody wanted to fund a church. And besides, it got appraised at only $250,000 an acre, and it's 3.5 acres. So we bought it for like $1.1 million, and it's only worth $750,000. It wasn't working out well, and we would lose our money after 30 days. That 25 grand, and that 30 days went, and nobody was talking. No lending institution, and a new bank opened up in town. This new bank's president was the owner, chief financial officer, main funder, and he wanted to do a community project because he's a church guy on a big church. He said, Christian, we'll help you. I said, fabulous, man. I'll tell you what, Christian, what we will do is, I know the appraisal, what it is, it doesn't right, but we'll go 50-50. You come in with 50%, we'll give you that. I said, that sounds great, Frank, but you know what? We don't have any money. We don't have 50%. And he said, okay. All the federal regulations will allow us to do legally all that we can do, because I want to do this, be nice to the community, we're opening up, doing something new. He said, federally, all we can do is 85. This is ridiculous, but we will give you 85%, and you come in with 15%. I said, Frank, that is such a blessing, thank you, but you don't get it. We don't have any money. And he said, oh, Christian, tell you what we can do. You get somebody to put a condo or something up, and we'll lend them the money on a second for that 15% over here. We'll give you the 85% over here, and we'll do the deal. I said, it sounds good. And it closed on the eve of Thanksgiving. And it took us 4 years to get it developed because the city was not happy with us, so they wouldn't change the zoning. And so we had those games and hoops to play through. We ended up giving the city the front acre, though they paid it for us. And the day they gave it to us and we paid them, the zoning changed. They said one had nothing to do with the other. It just happened to work out, and that day the property went up $1 million in value, and we were able to pay everybody off and live happily ever after.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And
So
that is Lakeside.
Yeah, it's on
Lakeside.
the Seaside Center for
Seaside,
Spiritual
I'm
Living
sorry.
on Lake Drive, and it was an old packing house
Yeah.
and a nursery,
And
and
it's a wonderful property. Then after that, you purchased property.
yeah, we purchased an
behind it.
acre and a quarter behind it. We've got a wonderful Montessori school going in there, so all day long we have the sounds of children playing on the back, so it's not actually in our building. It's really seen as a community place. It's the largest venue in Encinitas, so we have a lot of interesting events that come through there.
Do you have anything you want to share about your time in the different offices or committees that you worked with at United Church?
Well, I was really blessed. I got to serve as vice president with a wonderful president, Dr. Ruth Deaton. She was just legendary and a bright light, and I learned a lot in terms of leadership and dealing with the different personalities and letting things play out and yet keeping the intention. After that, I had the blessing to be the last appointed president by the Board of Trustees. I was 38 then, so I think there was a desire to bring in that fresh energy and fresh blood. And within that tenure, in that role, you're on all the committees and everything, get your hands in the awareness. We went through a fascinating time of transition from how we had been operating into a whole new design. But what was fun going on at that point, there were two organizations at that time. And in the 80s, the first time the ministers came together, in a C. Lamar, they had Dr. Fred Vogt, and I don't know, was it Carlton Whitehead or that brought the ministers together. But then there were always meetings that were going on that weren't official meetings. And so as president, one of the first things I did was meet with Dr. James Golden, who was the president of RSI at that time. And we had those meetings, and they had to be hush-hush. But the next president in there was Dr. David Walker. And he just saw me as his kid. And it was like a road show. We went out and we were public. We came out of the closet together. And, with the love between the two organizations, we talked, we should get together. And David always said, no, we got to dance first. But what was interesting in the new organizational design that was going on, we changed it from being an appointed president to the community of religious science deciding who they wanted to lead the organization, and the title changed to community spiritual leader. So I became the first elected spiritual community leader, and so I held that. I got to be the last president, the first elected community spiritual leader, and then it was turned over in '92, so it was almost 4 years. It's a wonderful leader on the United side, which was Dr. Kathy Hearn, who worked just so patiently with Dr. Ken Gordon, who was the president with RSI. And so there was this blending and this merging and this integration and just the wonderful natural unfoldment. And they delicately worked out the differences in the mechanics. And occasionally they'll check in and say, hey, Christian, what do you think about this? But at that point, I had a son. But about '02, when Dr. Kathy came in, I was on the road a lot. I was involved with other organizations like the Association for Global New Thought, which is a powerful organization that has somehow synthesized and unified all the different branches of the New Thought movement and has taken what at one time INTA used to do well was, bring the groups together. What the Association for Global New Thought, under the direction of Dr. Barbara Fields, is she has somehow synthesized us and has taken us to the world stage. And we stand as a united front called the New Thought movement. And so as you have got, traditional Christianity and Judaism, or the indigenous cultures, or the Zoroastrians, or the Sikhs, the Jains, or, the list goes on a global recognition. The New Thought movement is now talked about in the equal conversation as the other pieces that are there. And also the Association of Global New Thought that I had the blessings of working with brought out initiatives that united everyone, whether it was the season for peace, or had the blessings of going into His Holiness, the Dalai Lama's place in Dharamsala, and sitting in dialogue and conversing with him, and then being invited to his actual home, and being in his house and talking. And so AG&T is what they're known, has been really powerful in doing that. Worked a little bit with the Anton, which is an aspect of religious science. They were the first to give me a doctorate, so they hold a spot in my heart for that. I've also been involved with, it's called the Evolutionary Leaders, and it is outside the New Thought movement. Deepak Chopra is really the initiating face, and Diane Williams is the organizer of that, but it is a wonderful contingency of powerful leading edge thinkers of our time, whether it is Dr. Bruce Lipton or Dr. Michael Beckwith, Peter Russell, or and the list just goes on. The great thinkers that are involved, Joan Brzezinko, Gene Houston, all those. And so I'm in there really upholding the spiritual side of things. You've got these great minds, the biologists that are in there, the scientists that are in there, the educators that are in there, those that are part of the governance and the world monetary systems. But I get to be the voice that reminds people the spirituality. So it's an honor, and I listened to the level of conversations and thinkings that are so progressive, that are definitely the fringe of what is going on. But you get an inkling of what is going to come into the mainstream eventually.
So tell us, Christian, about your community affairs that are going on now. And tell us a little bit about Callie, your wife, and how she's involved with the church and you. And
Well, Seaside's really focused in serving the community we're in. So there's this community resource center that we support, that we collect food for. We also find organizations within our community to support with the tithe, and we bring them into Seaside once a month. We have them on stage, and we call it Heart to Heart, how we can take our hands off our campus and out into the streets. And so we showcase a particular nonprofit there and support them. I'm also president of the Ministerial Association in our town. We also have within our communities these wonderful ministries, but I guess we call them connection groups now. And my wife, Callie, she just rocks it. She leads our women's group. It's called the Seaside Sisters. Literally hundreds of people come to her events. Her list is extensive, and there is just a sense of connection and love and support, and it is really probably the strongest, most viable part of our community that supports the sisterhood in their things that they're going through, whether they bring in speakers, or one of the things she's done is brings in films once a quarter, and it has to do with the environment oftentimes. And so we have a very strong outreach in terms of our environment and our green ministry. We've gone solar, we've got a community garden, we don't use paper goods, we refuse to have plastic bottles of water around there. She's definitely one of the ones who spearheads that. She is extremely involved in the areas she wants to be involved, not where I think she could play.
Yeah,
she's very strong about that. But as a partner, a spouse, she has given a lot, to have me serve and watch me, be talked to, and people sometimes ignore her. I just want to honor all the spouses of ministers and what they just surrender in terms of supporting the one who gets the spotlight and all of that, and what it costs the family in terms of the nights and the days and the calls and the unique things. So she actually one time created a group for spouses called SPA, Spiritual Partners Association. So, and also my son, Trevor, he has just been a wonderful part of my life, but he's not involved at Seaside, and so it's just interesting to have him at home, and then it takes somebody to watch him. So that's always an interesting dynamic. But we find ways constantly to support what's going on in the community, because my belief is a spiritual center is not only for the people that are there, though they are the first and foremost that we take care of and support, but also we reach out, whether it's cleaning the beaches, or it's involved with the chamber. We just pay attention to what's important within our community. Encinitas is a small town with their own city council, and so I work to stay connected with them and how it is that we can support them and bring those pieces back to our community, because they like to get hands-on and involved. I think the spiritual practices these days that really attracts a younger generation has to do with activities where they're around people of like mind, and they can get their hands involved and engaged and do something of significance and difference. We're stretching in that way too.
very good. How do you see Centers for Spiritual Living or Science of Mind, religious science in the world in the future? How is it?
Well, I think what's really valuable is that we continue to share the name of Centers for Spiritual Living or religious science. I like that. That's what I came up in, and that's my blood. Though I do understand the value of a more inclusive, center of spiritual living. I think the value of sharing the name is that there's a place where people can find it articulated and delineated and specified. But the new thought is spreading across our culture. It's the fastest growing social order, in our country. It is the progressive thinkers, as the conscious creatives, the cultural creatives that Paul Ray brought forth, points out there's 50 million people in the United States alone that are thinking beyond the old ways of being, that there are greater possibilities. And so I think the thought that we represent is emerging, whether it's called Centers for Spiritual Living or Science of Mind, which is what our teaching is, that it is showing up in the literature, in the movies, in the media, in the operas. You had Louise Hay, who just this week made her transition, has created a publishing house that is just really dedicated to the new thought. And so it is coming forth, and what is beginning to happen within our structure, our organization, is we are boldly beginning to take our principles and with courage apply it to the relevancy of what's going on in our world today. The traditional mainline churches have no problem telling people what to think and how they should think about a particular situation that is going on. But we have these wonderful universal spiritual principles that are applicable and relevant to all situations in life. And so whether it is a response to saying, everybody should be free enough to choose their religion. We used to be able to say that and not be concerned, but sometimes it goes through filters in time that people call that political. Well, there's nothing political about saying, we believe in people's freedom to choose how they want to honor the presence of God. We have talked about the equality of all people. That is our Declaration of Independence. These are the spiritual truths that we hold within our heart, that you, me, our brothers and sisters around this planet are one people. And so as we find the courage to speak it in the face and not politicize and not take sides, but say this is a spiritual principle that's relevant to what's going on. We have just had, catastrophes or floods or fires. And you know what? The God's right there in the midst of it. That Spirit is omnipresent. And I'm going to be bold enough to point out that, you guys are in panic, but I'm going to bring a new thought here. And this is a spiritual truth that is not, held by just this particular religion. What we need is more people uniting together as one planet, as one people, as brothers and sisters, and realize that we can honor that presence, that life force, that God, that all-initiating first pulse, first cause, and call it what you want. There's many paths and cultures. Religions are really based upon the cultures. And what we have done is really drop some of that dogma that will separate us from others and say these are the spiritual principles that just unite all of us together. And so what you'll find within our communities is a diversity of beliefs, of religions, of philosophies, because we're not out there making people wrong. What we're doing is sharing what people in our world is hungering for, real things that does not separate but unites humanity together. We've got a teaching and a thought that is needed for today, and you've got to be bold enough to do that. And what we believe is that everyone who's sitting in our community is a spiritual leader, and they are charged to take this spiritual message to the world.
Thank you, Christian. Christian has written several books, and you have one that comes out every year along with Dr. Pedro Weldis.
Yeah.
And what's the name of that?
Well, our last one is the Joyous Abundance Journal, and it's a 365 days of inspiration that's followed with a little process for you and an affirmation to keep it simple.
And then you wrote about surfing, and you wrote about flying, because you're a pilot.
I am.
And his latest book is Living from the Mountaintop. Wonderful book.
It is. Be the mystic you were born to be.
I'm looking forward to reading it and doing all the exercises in it. So thank you very much, Christian, for sharing your time and being a wise sage with us.
It's hard to think that's what I am, but I'm glad I've got some. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you.